My name is Frances Gray. I'm 31 years old, and I was 18 the day my mother told me which of her children actually mattered. That April, 6 weeks before my college deposit was due, I found out my parents had emptied the fund my grandparents spent 18 years building, $187,000 of milk money, and used it to buy my brother a house on the other side of town. When I asked my mother why, she gave me an answer I will repeat to you exactly, because I have never been able to forget it. I didn't scream. I didn't sue. A lawyer will tell you exactly why I couldn't. I just called my grandmother. And what that 74-year-old woman did in a milking parlor at 4 in the morning ended up on national television. But here's what none of them knew the day my mother said those words. She wasn't the first woman in our family that sentence had been used on. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet people finally tell the stories their families hoped would stay buried, and where the comeback is always earned. If stories about family, betrayal, and hard-won justice speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Harlow Falls, New York, is the kind of town where everybody knows what your father does for a living. Mine sold tractors. Gray Equipment and Supply, right on Route 12, my dad's name in green letters you could read from the feed mill. In April of 2013, I was a senior, and my days ran on rails. Up at 5. 3-hour shift at the farm supply store before first period. School. Homework at the kitchen table while my mother cooked for 4 and talked about 1. My brother Brandon was 24, 6 years ahead of me, selling balers at my dad's dealership, and every dinner was a report on his day. Which farmer he'd charmed, which commission he'd landed, what Rick Gray's boy would do with the place someday. I want to be fair here, so I'll say it plainly. Nobody was cruel to me in that house. I was fed, clothed, driven to church. I just learned early that the spotlight had one setting, and it wasn't aimed at me. So I did what quiet girls do. I got straight A's nobody asked about. I fixed things before anyone noticed they were broken. I made myself the cheapest child anyone ever raised, and I told myself that was the same as being loved. On the refrigerator that spring, held up by a magnet shaped like a Gray Equipment tractor, was my acceptance letter from Cornell. Animal science, pre-vet. The one thing I had ever wanted out loud. My mother walked past that letter 40 times a day. She never once touched it. Looking back, I think the magnet said everything. My future, pinned to the fridge by my father's business, tolerated like a coupon nobody planned to use. I should have paid attention to that. Instead, I paid attention to a bank date circled on my calendar. May 1st, deposit day. The fun started the week I was born. My grandparents, Walter and Ruth Kessler, ran a small dairy 6 miles out of town, 40 cows, a farmhouse with daisy wallpaper in the back bedroom. The story goes that Grandpa Walter held me in the hospital, drove straight to the bank in his church coat, and opened an account with that month's milk check. Close to $500 a month went in after that. Every month. Every year. Through drought years and flood years and the year milk prices fell so low that half the county sold their herds. Grandpa kept a ledger, a blue cloth notebook, and he wrote every deposit in pencil and handwriting like barbed wire. Milk money's honest money, he liked to say. It comes out of your knuckles. In 2004, they sold the back 40 acres to the Hollis family next door, and $15,000 of that went in too. One line in the blue book, underlined twice. Around 2002, a financial advisor at the bank talked them into moving everything into a proper college plan. Better growth, tax benefits, all of it true. And one piece of advice that would cost me my future. Put the account in your daughter's name, he said. Parents as owners. It's simpler for financial aid later. So my mother's name went on my money. My grandparents kept writing checks. Nobody thought twice, because who would? Grandpa Walter died in the fall of 2011, 79 years old, in the barn he built. Grandma Ruth sold the herd that winter but kept the land, leased the pasture, and kept making deposits out of the lease checks. By the September of my senior year, 18 years of knuckles and weather had grown into $187,000. I knew the number because Grandma showed me the statement at her kitchen table the week I mailed my applications. She was so proud. She had no idea. The deposit for Cornell was due May 1st, and the college wanted it drawn properly from the plan. So on a Tuesday afternoon, Grandma Ruth picked me up from school and we drove to the bank together. She wore her good coat. She'd brought the blue ledger for no reason except that she liked the weight of it, the way you'd bring a photo of someone to the airport. We sat across from a teller named Dana who had been 2 years ahead of me in school. Dana typed the account number. Then she stopped typing. She looked at the screen a little too long, the way medical people look at x-rays before they turn around, and she asked, very quietly, if we wanted to speak with the branch manager. The balance of my college fund was $63.11. The rest had been withdrawn in one transaction the previous October. All of it. 6 months before, while I was filling out applications at the kitchen table, while my mother refilled my coffee and told me not to stay up too late. Grandma Ruth didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask Dana to check again. She sat with her hands folded on that blue notebook like a woman in a pew, and I watched something in her face close and lock, and I realized she had already done the math I was refusing to do. Only 2 people could touch that account. One of them was dead. On the way out, she stopped on the sidewalk, in front of the window with the poster about dream homes, and she said the thing I'd been too afraid to say inside. Ask your mother. Not a guess. She said it the way you say a diagnosis. She was too quiet to drive, so I took the wheel of her truck, hands at 10 and 2, very carefully, because steering was the only thing left I knew how to control. She let me off at the end of Maple Street, took the wheel back, and drove herself home. My mother was in the kitchen when I got home, browning onions, wearing the apron with the State Fair ribbon pinned to it. I stood in the doorway and told her where I'd been. I watched her shoulders, waiting for them to flinch. They didn't. She turned the burner down, wiped her hands, and faced me with the calm of a woman who had been waiting 6 months for this conversation and had already won it in her head. Yes, she'd moved the money. Yes, all of it. Your brother needed a real start, she said. He's got a family coming someday, a name to carry, the business. A man can't build anything from an apartment. The house on Quarry Road had come up for sale in October, a good price, and good prices don't wait for graduations. She said it the way you'd explain crop rotation. Sensible, settled. She even smiled a little like she was waiting for me to catch up to the arithmetic. I asked the only question I had. Why? It was all I could afford. And my mother looked at me. Looked right at me. Not away. I want that on the record. And said, because he's the one who actually matters in this family. The onions kept cooking. The clock over the stove kept going. I didn't say a word. I put my keys on the hook where they'd hung since I was 16, and I walked up the stairs past the school pictures. Hers, Brandon's, mine, all in matching frames like we'd been the same kind of children. From my window, I could see my father in the yard by his truck. He wasn't coming in. He'd heard every word through the screen door, and he was checking a tire that didn't need checking. That's when I understood the vote had been unanimous. I waited until the house went dark, and then I sat on my bedroom floor with my back against the bed and called my grandmother. It was past 10. She answered on the second ring, because widows who ran dairies never really learned to sleep in. I told her all of it. The onions, the arithmetic, the house on Quarry Road. And then, because she had earned the truth, and because I couldn't carry it alone, I repeated the sentence. Because he's the one who actually matters in this family. The line went so quiet I thought the call had dropped. I could hear her kitchen clock, the one shaped like a rooster, ticking in the dark 6 miles away. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't shaking, and it wasn't old. It was flat and level, like a road you could drive all night. I've paid for that sentence once already, she said. I won't pay for it twice. I didn't understand what she meant. I thought maybe she was talking about the money, and I started to say something about lawyers, about calling someone, and she cut me off the way she'd cut off a heifer heading for the road. No, she said. Not tonight. Tonight you'll pack a bag for the weekend. I need your hands. That was it. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She didn't say a single soft thing, and I have loved her for that ever since, because soft things were what everyone else offered instead of the truth. I sat there a long time after we hung up, listening to my parents' house settle around me like something that had already made its decision. I had one question I couldn't put down. She'd paid for that sentence once already. When? And who, in God's name, had said it to her? That weekend at the farmhouse, Grandma Ruth laid the blue ledger open on the kitchen table between us like a will. She walked me through 18 years, page by page, her finger moving down the pencil lines. 480 in March of 1998, the month the milk truck broke an axle. 510 that Christmas. The 15,000 from the back 40 in 2004, underlined twice. Because Grandpa said land you sell for a child isn't sold, it's planted. Deposit by deposit, their part came to over $120,000, and the market had grown it patiently into 187. 18 years of 4 a.m. milkings are sitting in that number, she said. 18 years of his hands and mine. Then she closed the book, and we did my math, which took less time. The deposit due May 1st. Fall tuition after that. My savings from the farm store came to $1,100. You could stack every dollar I had ever earned against one semester and watch it disappear like hay in a flood. I said maybe I'd defer a year, work, figure something out, and I heard how thin it sounded in that kitchen. Grandma got up, took the phone off the wall, she still had a phone on the wall, and called the bank's customer line herself. She stood very straight while she worked through the menus, gave the account number from memory, and asked one question. What could be done when contributed funds were withdrawn by the account owner? I watched her listen. I watched her thank the young man politely, the way you'd thank a vet who just told you the cow won't make it. Then she hung the phone back on its hook and stood there with her hand still on it, looking out the window at the empty barn. I went back to my parents' house Sunday night because I still lived there, and pretending otherwise wasn't a plan yet. Dinner was pot roast. Brandon came, flushed and happy, because Brandon was always invited and always came, and he talked about the house. His house. The fence quotes he was getting, cedar versus vinyl. And did Dad think a man should stain his own deck, or hire it out? I sat there cutting meat I couldn't taste, and I watched my brother the way you'd watch a stranger at a bus stop. And here is the strangest thing I learned that night. He didn't know. He thanked my parents at that table for their savings. Their savings. He said he knew what it cost them, that he'd make them proud, and my mother patted his hand and let the word stand. My father studied his plate like there was a map on it. Brandon wasn't gloating. You can't gloat over a theft you've never heard of. Whatever my brother's sins were, and being adored isn't a sin, exactly. He believed the story he'd been told, same as I'd believed mine. 2 children, 2 stories, 1 teller. I excused myself before pie. In the hallway, my mother stopped me with a hand on my arm, light as a price tag, and said, we would all move forward now. That family meant not keeping score. She'd kept the only score that ever counted, and now that she'd won, the scoreboard was suddenly bad manners. I said I had homework. Upstairs, I sat on my bed and did something I had never done in my obedient straight-A life. I opened the phone book. We still had those too, and found the number for the only lawyer in Harlow Falls, and I wrote it on my wrist like a girl writing a test answer she intended to use. The lawyer could see me Tuesday after school. Monday I had a shift at the farm store, and on my break I walked over to the dealership to pick up my last paycheck from the office because I'd worked the parts counter there the summer before. The lot smelled like diesel and cut grass. 2 of the salesmen were leaning on a hay rake by the service bay, and they didn't see me behind the row of mowers, and that's the only reason I know what I know. They were talking about Brandon's house, about the closing last fall, about how Rick had taken a long lunch that day and driven Brandon up to the title office in Boonville for the closing, and how they'd come back with a case of beer and passed bottles around the service bay like it was a christening. Boss was grinning all week, one of them said. Paid the whole thing outright. No mortgage. Can you believe that in this economy? Then they saw me. I want you to understand what changed in that parking lot. because it wasn't the facts. I already knew the money was gone and where it went. What changed was the shape of my father. For 6 months, I'd built him a little shelter in my head. He didn't know the details. He went along. He was weak. Weak isn't wicked. And it turns out he took a long lunch. He drove the truck. He bought the beer. My quiet, tire-checking father was the getaway driver, and the whole sales floor had toasted my college fund without knowing they were drinking it. I took my paycheck from the office girl, thanked her, and walked back to the farm store through the alley behind the feed mill, so nobody on Route 12 would see my face while it rearranged itself. Ed Harmon had been practicing law in Harlow Falls for 30 years out of an office above the pharmacy, and he had the decency to make me coffee before he broke my legs. I told him everything. He listened with his fingers laced, asked who owned the account, and winced when I answered like I'd stepped on his foot. Then he explained, slowly and kindly, how the world actually worked. The college plan belonged to its owner, my mother. The day my grandparents' checks cleared into it, those checks became gifts, hers in every way the law cared about. She had the right to withdraw every cent, and the government's only punishment was a tax bill and a penalty on the growth, which she had apparently paid without blinking and still had enough to buy a house outright. Unethical as hell, he said, and legal as Sunday. He'd seen it twice before in his career. Both times the family lawyer got the same phone call I was making, and both times he'd had nothing to offer but coffee. Your grandparents saved for 18 years, he said, and the paperwork says they were just being generous to your mother. I asked about suing anyway, about making it public in a courtroom, about anything with a docket number. And he shook his head at each one like a man waving cars past an accident. Then, as I was picking up my bag, he added the thing lawyers add at the door. There's one more problem. And it's worse, he said. You're 17 or 18, I take it. Sit back down for a second. Let me tell you what the financial aid people are going to say to you, because you should hear it in this office and not on the phone. And what he told me next closed the last door I didn't even know I'd been counting on. Here's the rule nobody tells you until you're bleeding, until you turn 24, unless you're married or a veteran or a ward of the court. The financial aid forms don't care where you sleep or who pays your bills. They want your parents' income, period. And on paper, the grays of Harlow Falls looked wonderful. A dealership, a paid-off house on Maple Street, and now, thanks to my college fund, a second house with no mortgage on Quarry Road. I called the aid office myself that week, from the farmhouse, with Grandma Ruth shelling peas across the table so I wouldn't be alone for it. A patient woman walked me through it. Refusing to help doesn't make you independent, she said. She was sorry. She said that a lot. Based on the family's numbers, I should expect little to nothing. And no, there was no box on the form for what had actually happened to me. There was one thread left. Cornell would let me push my start to January. A spring admit, 1 semester grace, if I confirmed by fall and showed I could pay when I got there. A door held open by 2 fingers. When I hung up, I laid it all out loud, mostly to hear it myself. No lawsuit. No aid. No fund. A January deadline and $1,100. Grandma Ruth kept shelling peas. She was quiet so long I thought she hadn't been listening, and I should have known better, because that woman never in her life missed anything said in her kitchen. Then she set the bowl down, wiped her hands on her apron, and asked me a question so far from anything I was thinking that I made her repeat it. How much a month, she said. Does Marty Hollis pay a milker? I stared at her. She was 74 years old. She asked it again. My mother found out about the lawyer by Thursday, because in Harlow Falls the pharmacy is under the law office, and the pharmacist plays bridge with her. She was waiting in the living room when I came home from school, sitting in the good chair, and she didn't bother with onions this time. You will not embarrass this family, she said, over money that was never yours. That was the whole speech. Not an apology, not even anger exactly, a property line being read aloud. Something in me went very calm, the way the air goes still before hail, and I heard myself say that I understood perfectly, and I went upstairs and packed. It took 40 minutes to box up 18 years. That's a fact I've never gotten over. Not the packing. The fitting. clothes, books, my telescope from the Christmas I was 11. All of it fit in the bed of my grandmother's truck when she came for me, like I'd been living in that house as a guest who traveled light. My mother stayed in her chair, but my father was standing in the hallway by the door when I carried the last box down, and he pressed $200 bills into my hand, folded small, the way you'd pass a note in church. He looked at the wall while he did it. I took the money. I want to be honest with you, I took it. I needed gas and a phone bill, and I hated that I took it, and neither of us said one true thing to the other. Grandma Ruth's spare bedroom had daisy wallpaper and a bed with a headboard like a garden gate. And that first night she told me whose room it had been. Your mother's, she said, and closed the door, and left me lying in the dark inside my mother's childhood, staring at the same flowers she stared at when she was a girl who wanted things. If you've ever been told, in words or in silence, that your seat at the family table was borrowed, do one thing for me right now. Type the word earned in the comments. Because the rest of this story belongs to a 74-year-old woman who decided to build a table of her own. And if you're new here, subscribe, because you'll want to see her do it. 4 days after I moved in, I woke at 3:40 in the morning to light under my door and the smell of coffee. I found my grandmother at the kitchen table in her barn coat, lacing rubber boots, a thermos already filled, and for one sleep-stupid second I thought something had died. She looked entirely awake. Marty Hollis needs a morning milker, she said, like she was reporting weather. Starting today. 4 to 7, 6 days a week. His parlor, his machines, my hands. I stood in that doorway in my socks and argued with her, and I'm not proud of everything I said. That she was 74. That her knuckles ached on rainy days. I'd seen her rub them. That this wasn't her debt. She let me run out of words the way you let a pail run out of water. Then she picked up the thermos and told me the part she'd already decided, because the deciding had happened days ago, somewhere between the bank and the peas. Every dollar of it goes in a new account, she said. I opened it Monday. This one has my name on it. Only mine. She said that last part looking straight at me, and underneath it I could hear everything she wasn't saying about advisors and daughters and simpler for financial aid. I told her she couldn't rebuild 18 years at 4 in the morning. I actually said that, out loud, to a woman buttoning her coat in the dark. She stopped at the door with her hand on the latch and gave me the closest thing to a shrug I ever saw from her. Cows don't care whose name is on the barn, she said. And she walked out into the cold, and after a minute I saw the lights of the Hollis parlor come on across the field, one window at a time. The second morning, I went with her. I didn't ask permission. I just set my alarm and was standing at the truck at 10 to 4, and she looked at me and nodded once, and that was the whole conversation. If you've never been inside a milking parlor before, Dawn, I don't know how to make you feel it, but I'll try, because everything that happened afterward grew out of that room. Steam off the cows' backs, the pulse of the vacuum pump, steady as a heart. Iodine and warm rubber and the radio Marty keeps on the gospel station with the volume at almost nothing. Ruth Kessler worked the line like she'd never left. Dip, strip, attach. The cups landing soft, her bad knuckles moving anyway. And Marty Hollis paid her wages like any hand, and me a little less, which was fair, because I was slower. $8.50 an hour for me, a bit more for her. We taped a chart inside the farmhouse cupboard door, and every Friday she wrote the week's deposits in pencil, in handwriting that got more like Grandpa Walter's every month, and I did the long division in my head and kept the answer to myself. At that rate, rebuilding what was taken would take longer than the years either of us could spare. She caught me doing that math once, standing at the cupboard with my face giving it away. We won't get there in time, she said, not even pretending otherwise. We'll get there anyway. And I understood, slowly, standing in that parlor week after week, that she wasn't really racing my January deadline. She was answering a sentence. On the 5th or 6th morning, Marty came down the pit line and watched me strip a cow, and he said, not unkindly, "Aren't you the Grays girl?" And my grandmother answered before I could, without looking up from the cups. "She's mine," Ruth said. The pump kept its heartbeat. Nobody argued with her. That same month, My brother had his housewarming. I wasn't invited, which saved everyone the trouble of watching me decline, but my friend Kayla's mother did the baking for it, and Kayla gave me the whole tour secondhand at the farm store, in the low voice girls use for reporting on enemy territory. 3 kinds of pie. Folding chairs on the new cedar deck my father had helped stain after all. A banner from the dealership, and my mother in her state fair apron, presiding, telling anyone who held still that this was what family was for, investing in the right places at the right time. Those were her words. Kayla did the voice, and then Kayla stopped doing the voice and got quiet, and told me the part she'd actually walked over to tell me. Late in the afternoon, somebody's uncle, a dairyman from out by the county line, had asked in a loud, friendly way, "Whatever happened to Frankie's Cornell thing? Wasn't she supposed to be some kind of a scholar?" And the deck went quiet, Kayla said. Not dramatic. Just a click, like a switch being turned off. And then my mother offered pie, and the conversation moved along like a stream around a rock, and nobody asked again. That's the part I thought about during the 4 a.m. shifts that week. Not the deck, not the banner. The click. A whole town's worth of nice people at a party, and one of them stumbles into the truth by accident, and the room closes over it smooth as pond water. Silence like that isn't empty, it turns out. It's load-bearing. Every family like mine is a barn held up by the questions nobody asks. I stripped cows in the dark and thought, one day somebody is going to ask again, and I am not going to change the subject. In June, I went up to the farmhouse attic looking for a box fan and found my mother instead. Her cedar chest sat under the window where it had sat since my mother was a girl, and I opened it because I was 18 and it was there. Inside, folded in tissue paper, was a dance dress. Homemade, robin's egg blue, with a hem someone had picked out and re-sewn twice. Under the dress were 4H ribbons, and under the ribbons, in a flat envelope gone soft as cloth, was a letter from the State College, dated 1979, offering admission to Carol Ann Kessler, and along with it the housing form, filled out in a girl's careful cursive, never mailed. I sat back on my heels. I heard the stairs, and then my grandmother was in the doorway with her hand on the frame, looking at what I was holding, and she didn't take it from me. She told it plain, standing up, the way she told everything. "Your mother tested into that school all on her own," she said. "Best marks in her class. And that same spring, your Uncle Dale wanted to expand the herd, and the new parlor cost what it cost, and your grandfather sat at the supper table and said, 'The money follows the name, and girls marry into other people's names.' She recited that the way you recite scripture you've stopped believing. Carol did the sensible thing, she said. Stayed. Married Rick. Folded the dream up with the dress. I asked, barely out loud, if Grandpa ever made it right. My grandmother looked at the envelope a long time. He spent the last 16 years of his life apologizing to a girl who hadn't been born yet, she said. He never once said it to the girl in this chest. She went back down the stairs, and I sat in the hot attic holding my mother's future in my hands, and for one terrible minute I loved her, and it changed nothing, and I knew both of those things could be true at once. I couldn't sleep that night, and my grandmother heard me not sleeping, the way she heard everything, and we ended up at the kitchen table at midnight with cocoa like I was 9. I tried to put the thing into words, that I finally understood where the sentence came from, that it had been handed to my mother across a supper table in 1979, and she'd carried it her whole life, and 34 years later she'd handed it to me, the way you hand down a coat. And what scared me, I told her, was the part of me that wanted to make my parents pay. Because I could feel how good it would taste, and I could feel something else too. That making them pay meant agreeing to the scale. Arguing I was worth $187,000 is still arguing I have a price. Somebody else sets it, somebody else moves it, and I spend my life performing for the appraisal, which is what I'd been doing since I was old enough to clear a table. My grandmother let me get all the way to the end of it. Then she turned her mug in a slow circle once and said the thing that reorganized my life. "I'm not raising money to buy you back a seat, Frankie." I sat with that. "So what are we building?" I asked, because the chart in the cupboard was real money and real knuckles, and it had to be for something. She stood up, rinsed her mug, and answered with her back to me, looking out the black window toward the Hollis barn. "A table," she said. "Ours." And then, because she was Ruth Kessler, she added, "4 a.m. comes early. Drink your cocoa." What she was actually building, neither of us could have guessed. It was already on its way to us, wearing a press badge. By midsummer, we had a rhythm you could set a watch by. Parlor from 4 to 7, farm store till 5, supper, the chart on Friday. I'd confirmed my January start with Cornell, which felt like promising to meet a train with no ticket in my hand, and I studied the vet school forms at night like other girls study horoscopes. My mother, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Her kind of quiet, which is a weather system. In July, she sent me one text, the only one all summer. "Your little performance at Hollis's is being noticed. Stop it." I read it standing in the parlor pit with iodine on my gloves. Performance. 2 women doing wage work before dawn, and the word she reached for was performance. But notice the other word. Noticed. My mother had spent her whole life managing what Harlow Falls noticed, and something had slipped. I didn't answer the text. I photographed the time clock at Hollis's, my card and my grandmother's in the rack, punched 3:58 and 3:59, and I sent that. No caption. She never replied. And then, on a Tuesday toward the end of July, the something that slipped showed up on our road wearing khakis and holding a camera with a real lens. A woman, 40-ish, was standing at the fence line at 6:30 in the morning, photographing the parlor lights across Hollis's east field, and when we came out she introduced herself. June Carver, from the Harlow County Gazette. She was doing a summer series, she said. Portraits of the county's oldest working hands, a blacksmith in Boonville, a seamstress of 81, that kind of thing. Somebody at the co-op had told her there was a woman in her 70s milking at Hollis Dairy, and she'd come to see for herself. She had no idea what she was standing next to. Neither, honestly, did we. June Carver came back 2 mornings later with permission from Marty and sat on an overturned crate in the parlor pit from 4 to 7, watching my grandmother work. She was good at her job, I'll say that. She didn't perform interest, she had it. She asked about the herd we used to have, about Grandpa Walter, about what changes and what doesn't in 50 years of dairying, and my grandmother answered in her flat, level way, and slowly the notebook filled. Discipline, weather, the price of feed, the gospel station. It would have made a lovely little feature, the kind you clip and put on the refrigerator, and for 2.5 hours, that's all it was. Then, near the end, with the last string of cows filing out and the pump winding down, June asked the question any decent reporter asks a 74-year-old widow hauling herself out of bed for wages. It wasn't gotcha. It was almost gentle. "What are you saving for?" she said. "At 74? And the parlor got very quiet. In that particular way I was learning to recognize. The click. Except this time, nobody offered pie. My grandmother finished hanging the cups. She dried her hands on her coveralls, taking her time, and I watched her decide. She could have said retirement, or a rainy day, or nothing at all, and the story would have run beside the blacksmith and the seamstress and died sweetly in a scrapbook. Instead, she looked over at me. One look, level as a fence rail, asking and offering in the same second. Then she turned back to June Carver and said, "That's my granddaughter's story to tell." And June Carver, God help us all, turned to me and uncapped her pen. We stood by the bulk tank, June and I, while the compressor hummed. She'd stopped writing, which is how I knew this part mattered to her. She told me straight what she'd already half-assembled from co-op talk and county records, a house on Quarry Road, bought outright in November, and a girl who'd been Cornell-bound suddenly milking at dawn. And then she put her pen down flat on her notebook and gave me the choice with the bark off. "I can write the sweet version," she said. "Nobody would blame you. Or you can tell me on the record what the money was. I want you to know exactly what I thought about in the 10 seconds I stood there, because it wasn't courage. I thought about the click on the cedar deck. I thought about a housing form filled out in careful cursive and never mailed, folded under a dress for more than 30 years because one man at one supper table decided the money follows the name, and everyone else agreed to never ask again. Silence was the family business. Longer than the dealership, older than the fund. Every woman before me had paid her dues to it. And I heard myself say, in a voice that came out steadier than I had any right to expect, yes. It was my college fund. My grandparents built it for 18 years, and it was $187,000. And it's gone. And you can use my name. June Carver wrote for a long time. Somewhere in the middle of it, I felt the floor of my old life give way, quietly. No splinters. Just gone. Because in a town of 3,000 people, there is no unsaying your own name in the county paper. She capped her pen. Thursday, she said. It'll run Thursday? I had 3 days left as a private person, and I spent them milking. The Gazette comes out Thursday morning, and by Thursday noon there was nowhere in the county you could stand and not feel it. The headline ran across the top of the front page, 18 years, 4 a.m. Why Ruth Kessler, 74, went back to the parlor. June Carver had written it clean, and that was the devastating part. No name-calling, no adjectives doing crimes. Just the ledger of it. The fund begun the week a granddaughter was born. The monthly milk checks. The withdrawal in October. The house in November. The balance of $63.11. Each fact set down next to the photograph. My grandmother in the steam, cups in hand, me blurred behind her, like exhibits nobody had to argue about. The town split the way ice splits. Quiet first, then loud. At the diner, Kayla texted me. 2 booths got into it over their eggs before 8 a.m. Their money. They can do what they like with it. Against 18 years, that poor woman. The church phone tree lit up in both directions at once. A farmer we barely knew left a gallon of maple syrup on the farmhouse porch with a note that said, "For the milker's girl, no signature." And sometime that night, someone, to this day I don't know who, and I've decided I don't want to, taped a photocopy of the front page to the glass door of Gray Equipment and Supply, so that whoever unlocked the dealership Friday morning had to peel their own family off the door before the customers came. My mother did not call me. My father did not call me. Across town, I'm told, the curtains on Maple Street stayed drawn all day. And 40 miles away, on a desk at the regional wire service, Thursday's Gazette was sitting in the stack. The wire service picked the story up Friday, and by the following week it had stopped being ours. That's the thing nobody warns you about. A story is like a heifer through a fence. You can chase it, but you're mostly going to watch it go. Papers across 3 states ran the photo of my grandmother in the steam. Then the sharing started, the way it did in 2013, neighbor to cousin to stranger, and the farmhouse phone began ringing at supper. A radio host from Syracuse, a station in Albany, and then, on a Wednesday, a producer from a national morning show, a voice so bright it sounded lit from behind, asking whether Ruth and Francis would come to New York and tell the story on live television. Grandma Ruth held the receiver like a snake and looked at me across the kitchen. And before we'd answered anybody anything, my mother came to the farmhouse. First time in years. I watched from the stairs, and I will tell you exactly what she said. Because it mattered. She did not say sorry. She stood in her own mother's kitchen, in her good coat, with the Gazette folded under her arm like a citation she intended to contest, and she said, "Call the paper. Tell them it was a family matter and they misquoted you. Tell them, and this all stops, and we can be a family again." She said it to her mother, not to me. She'd decided where the leak was. And my grandmother, who had been drying the same plate since my mother walked in, set the plate down and the towel, and answered in the voice level as a road. "I've paid for that sentence once already, Carol. I won't pay for it twice." I watched my mother's face do something I'd never seen it do. It didn't go angry. It went white. Because she knew exactly which sentence and exactly what it had cost, and for one breath she was 18 and standing at a supper table hearing that the money follows the name. Then she left. Before you see what happened on that broadcast, Tell me honestly in the comments. If the person who broke you offered everything back for the price of one small lie, would you take the deal? Type deal or truth. I read every answer. And subscribe if you haven't, because what my mother did next is the part nobody believes. Somewhere in that week, a stranger in Ohio started an online fundraiser. We didn't ask for it, didn't know about it until Kayla sent me the link with a row of exclamation points, and by then it had a life of its own. Rebuild the milk money, the page said, with June Carver's photograph on it, and the number under the photograph climbed like floodwater. Past what had been taken within days, then past 200,000, then further. And with the money came the letters. Hundreds. Then more, forwarded through the paper. Women mostly, my grandmother's age, and my mother's age, and mine. I was the daughter who stayed home so my brother could go. 1958. My father said educating me was watering another man's garden. My family used the word deserve like a fence, and I was always outside it. I read them at the kitchen table until I couldn't, and my grandmother read every single one, straight through, like sitting up with the sick. Here's what I couldn't say out loud yet. The number scared me, not the generosity, the meaning. Because if I just took it, all of it, what was I then? The girl bought back at a markup, the scale still standing, only now with the whole country's thumb on my side of it. My mother says I'm worth nothing. 10,000 strangers vote I'm worth plenty. Either way, somebody else is holding the price tag, and I'd sworn to a midnight kitchen that I was done being appraised. I didn't know what to do, and I mean that literally. There was no version I could picture that didn't feel like losing something I'd just found. And in the middle of all that noise, my phone buzzed with a name it had never once shown me. Brandon. 2 lines. Did you know the house came from your fund? Because I didn't. I called Brandon back that night, and we talked for an hour, and I'm keeping most of it, because some conversations you get to keep. I'll give you the shape of it. He'd believed the saving story to the letter. He'd thanked them at that table, meaning every word. And when the Gazette hit his porch, he'd sat on his cedar deck, bought with my mornings, stained with my father's help, and read the ledger of his own house, and something he'd been carrying his whole life finally had a name on it too. You think being the one who matters is free? He said, near the end, and didn't finish, and I didn't make him. Meanwhile, the machine kept moving. The morning show booked us for a live segment at the end of August. The producer with the lit from behind voice wanted what she called the full family picture and phoned my mother for comment. My mother declined, through a lawyer in Utica, which told me she was frightened in the only language she permitted herself. The dealership lost 2 fleet contracts in 1 week. Farmers can do arithmetic. And my father called me, the first time all summer, from the office after close. He didn't yell, and he didn't apologize either. He sounded old and tired. You're burning this family down, he said, over a bank account. I looked out the farmhouse window at the parlor lights across the field, and I felt how much lighter this answer weighed than everything I'd hauled all year. No, Dad, I said. You sold it. I'm just reading the receipt out loud. 2 days later, Grandma Ruth and I rode a bus 4.5 hours to New York City with the blue ledger in her lap. Somewhere past Binghamton, my phone lit up in the dark of the bus. Mom. I didn't answer on the bus. I answered at the hotel, standing at a window 11 floors above a street that never once got quiet, while my grandmother slept in the next bed, with her boots lined up like they were on call. My mother's voice, when it came, was one I hadn't heard in years, maybe ever. Not the property line, not the definition of family. Small and close to the receiver, like she was cupping the phone against a wind. Come home, she said. We'll sell the house. Every cent goes back. Your grandmother's account, your name on it this time, however you want it drawn up. You're my daughter. I stood there gripping the curtain, watching a cab make a slow turn, and for a second the entire year fell away, and I was 17 again with a letter on the fridge, waiting to be seen, because there it was, at last, arriving by phone at 10 at night. The thing I had been trying to earn since I was old enough to clear a table. She wanted me. And then she finished the sentence. All you have to do, she said, is tell them tomorrow it was a misunderstanding, a family matter that got out of hand. Say the paper got it wrong. Families don't do this to each other on television, Francis. There it was. The price tag, swinging gently from the gift. The room was quiet except for my grandmother's breathing and the city's low hum. I could hear my mother waiting. Really waiting. I'd swear on the ledger she was holding her breath. And 18 years of being the cheapest child anyone ever raised rose up in my throat, and what I said was, "I'll think about it." And I hung up and stood there in the dark. And God forgive me. I meant it. I thought about it all night. I want to be honest about that night, because the version where I never wavered is a lie, and this channel doesn't need another perfect heroine. I sat on the hotel windowsill until 3 in the morning, doing the accounting. On one side, my mother, wanting me, saying my name like it was worth protecting. The house sold, the money back, holidays repaired, my father looking at me instead of the wall. Everything, restored. For one sentence on television, one little lie, hardly bigger than the silences my family had been living in comfortably for 2 generations. Who would it even hurt? And then I made myself walk through it. Say the words. It was a misunderstanding. Watch the town nod, relieved. Watch the story fold itself up like a housing form into an envelope, into a chest, under a dress. And then live there, back at that table, welcome and warm, knowing my seat had been purchased with the one currency my family always accepted and always demanded, a woman agreeing to carry the silence for everyone. My mother had paid it in 1979. Her mother had watched it paid. The sentence gets handed down like a coat, and here it was being held out to me, freshly tailored. Wear it and you can stay. I took the blue ledger off the nightstand. My grandmother had carried it 250 miles on her lap, and I opened it to 2004 and put my finger on the line underlined twice. Land you sell for a child isn't sold, it's planted. Somewhere in me, quietly, without any music, the question I'd been carrying all summer stopped being a question. I took the hotel notepad off the desk and wrote a few lines, and folded the page into my jacket pocket and set 2 alarms, and slept like a farmer. What was on the page? You'll hear in a minute. The studio was colder than any barn I've worked in, and brighter than noon, and somewhere past the cameras, 100 strangers were arranged in rows like a jury that had already sent flowers. They mic'd my grandmother first. She sat on the white couch in her church coat with the blue ledger flat on her knees and her spine like a level, and when the host asked if she was nervous, she said she'd been up earlier than this every day since Eisenhower, and the crew laughed, and the red light came on. The host was kind, and she was thorough, and she'd read everything. She walked the country through it. The fund, the 18 years, the October withdrawal, the house, with the photographs going up on the screen behind us. And then she turned to me, and I watched her arrive at the question the whole segment had been built to ask. Your mother has said, through her attorney, that this was a private family matter that has been mischaracterized, a misunderstanding. She let the word sit there. Is it? And I looked